Hello, American. Great to have you on the show. I announced you as the American McGee because you're sort of a celebrity in the games business. And Alice was really a milestone in computer games. There is something that you may not know. We are very familiar with it because we, as a company, have been the distributor for the German Mac version of the game back in 2001. So we also helped creating a German version of the game for the Mac. So we're quite familiar with your work. In your project video, you kind of hint that the history of Alice is sort of chasing you everywhere. But I know you've done quite a few other projects. But would you say Alice is still the big thing that you're known for?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for having me join you here with the interview. As far as Alice goes, yeah, I mean, it's definitely the game I think most people associate most closely with my name, and it's also the only game where I've actually built the first one and then followed up with a sequel. It's a legacy that seems to follow me wherever I go. If I do try to kind of get away from Alice or away from the twisted fairy tale type of games, it's been much more difficult for me to sort of attract a new audience. So that keeps bringing me back to both Alice and to the theme of twisted fairy tales.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have a strong fan base, it seems, and your video expresses that in a funny way. So I can recommend that everybody should watch it. Now let's turn to the new game. Is this a new attempt to make it happen after Atari killed the project? What's the background story there? It seems you tried to do that also Ozombie thing before.
Well, I think you're referring to a previous attempt to adapt the Oz books into a video game that was called American McGee's Oz. And that was actually supposed to be the game to follow up the Alice product when I made the Alice game back at EA. And like you mentioned, it was Atari, though, that financed the Oz project. And then about 12 months into that production, they came back to us and said that they were going to cancel the project along with a handful of other games at that time because they, as a company, were running into financial difficulty. The Ozombie campaign, the Kickstarter campaign that we're running today, is in fact built around a entirely different take on the Oz books by L. Frank Baum. So we're trying to create a separation both for creative reasons and also for legal reasons, as much of a separation as possible between the two products, because we don't want, say, Atari, for instance, to mistake our attempts today with Oz as being somehow trying to replicate what we were building with them back in the day.
Yeah, okay, I can see that. I mean, I don't want to be in a lawsuit with any of the big guys anyway. So
yeah, even a company like Atari, who seems to continually run into financial trouble, can be quite a bother for us if they decide to get the wrong idea.
Yeah, I know. I mean, they sort of have that tradition of financial trouble, and we, as a company, started out in 1985 doing Atari ST stuff, so a different Atari, but they went bust in the mid-90s. So I'm quite familiar with the whole Atari history. So it seems you're going back to an old dream of yours and tried in a fresh attempt to make this a reality.
Yeah, so the new game, again, is set inside the Oz universe, but we're calling this Ozombie. The idea here is not that you're going to find brain-hungry zombies like you would in a zombie film or video game chasing you through Oz. Instead, we're using zombies as in the idea of conformity. And that's actually one of the themes that the early zombie movies touched on with the whole concept of zombies. So what we're going to do is present an action-adventure game that's very story-driven and puts the player into the world of Oz, where there's a massive war underway with an army being led by the Scarecrow, and he's on his mission to try to remove magic from the world of Oz and to try to impose a sort of conformity across the lands of Oz. And so that's the story. That's the idea for the concept of zombies in this world.
Okay, you sent us some concept art images. Maybe we should take a look at those. So it's great artwork. You don't have a game prototype yet, so you're in very early stages, it seems.
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, the artwork we're looking at here is conceptual work that's been done in the past couple of weeks. We are in the process of putting together a game prototype that we're hoping to show to the world somewhere during the Kickstarter campaign. But right now we're asking people to take a look at the art, read the story, and also follow my updates to learn more about the game design before we make that prototype available.
Yeah, I saw that in your funding you had this huge first day where I think all the American McGee fans just jumped on it. It's a bit slower now at the moment, but the Kickstarter campaigns have that slow phase every now and then. You did one before, and that was kind of close. I think you ended up with 104% or something like that.
Yeah, that one did come in very close, but it also was a very unusual campaign in that we were essentially launching a product that was already finished. So halfway through that Kickstarter campaign, we launched that product. And so we were using Kickstarter as a sort of way for the customers to get involved with the product and also to get involved with the items within the game via the Kickstarter. And that, resulted in them getting their hands on all kinds of interesting real-world prizes and backer rewards, and then also helping our team to kind of get a better sense of what it was that the audience was looking for them to complete as they moved forward after launch.
Yeah, so you sort of had the problem that people would ask, what are you doing on Kickstarter if it's already there?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that always kind of cracks me up, is that you have a sort of Kickstarter police, people who come in and they say, hey, how dare you use this platform for, and then they'll fill in the blank and they'll say, well, you're too old, or you're too young, or your product is doesn't fit, or, the way you're trying to use this is wrong. What's funny is that the only people who should be making those determinations are the Kickstarter, people themselves. I mean, if they allow the platform to be used for a certain type of fundraising, and someone wants to invent a way to make it work, then I say, why not?
Yeah, we went through the same thing, sort of. It seems there's no way to get it exactly right. And just like you said, I mean, our company is like 20 years old, so we're always sort of suspicious of being a publisher or something like that. Publisher is really evil, can't be that. On the other hand, if you present a dumb and unfinished concept, they will just not back you because you're not presenting enough. And we're kind of close to finishing our game. We tried it with a very low funding goal because we're really interested in getting Kickstarter feedback from the people, involve them a bit, start early PR on the project. And I think there's nothing wrong with, transmitting the message. This will be a reality for sure. It's no uncertainty here. You're sort of pre-purchasing the game that will exist. So what's wrong with that?
Yeah. Well, it's always been sort of strange to me to read some of the negative reactions, the people who seem to go to Kickstarter specifically looking for problems and not wanting to go along with the hope that the platform should really carry with it. The whole idea being that we can break away from the traditional models of financing where most of the time you're going to get tons of people telling you no. And so when I look at Kickstarter, it's to me a platform of hope that there's a chance that we could get something funded, even though it may not fit, the investor's standard definition of the type of product they want to see, or a publisher's standard definition. That's the whole point, is to kind of move away from standard definitions so that we can do interesting and innovative products.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that Alice wasn't exactly mainstream. I think a lot of people had a hard time understanding what it's all about, but people who ended up playing it really loved it. you know.
Sure.
And I can see that a mainstream publisher has a problem with that because they want to sell millions of copies. So obviously, the more mainstream, the better. But there's a lot of variety that gets lost that way. And I agree that Kickstarter is a great way to just be innovative and do things that nobody else wanted to support. So did you see weird reactions from the press that they kind of refused to report about a Kickstarter because people have been disappointed before and the whole Kickstarter hype is over and all that kind of stuff?
Well, we found that on our first Kickstarter with Akinero, we received a lot of negative press the very first day. In fact, it was Kotaku who came out with an article that claimed that I personally was bankrupt and that the company was out of money. And the quote was that we were panhandling on the internet. You know, the interesting thing was, despite this being an incredibly negative form of coverage and also being completely inaccurate, it was Kotaku who ended up being the largest single outside source of the funding that came to the Kickstarter campaign. So this sort of proved the concept that, you know, no press is necessarily bad press, right? This time around with Ozombie, we've seen what I kind of feel like is a much slower uptake of the news related to the project. And I'm not sure if that's because it's just a sort of slow news time in the year. We just came out of E3 and people are kind of exhausted from all what happened there. Or if there's a general sort of tiredness around Kickstarter in general. It's hard to say, but we have a schedule and a plan of events and announcements that we're going to work through in the hopes that we can keep people interested and bring new eyeballs to the campaign every day.
Yeah, it is a challenge to draw people to projects on Kickstarter now. We've made the same experience, even though we don't have your name. So I would assume that helps. But if the press in general is tired of it, there's not much to do about it. And I mean, we see that people who discover the project are excited. And I guess that's the same thing you experience. So everybody who is getting on board is very positive about it. I think that's a general Kickstarter experience.
Well, we get hit by sort of two expectations. One is a positive that damages us. That is that because of the name, a lot of people see that we're running a campaign and they assume that, well, they've got a big name, they're gonna be just fine, and so they don't back because they assume everybody else will back it. Yeah. So that can be problematic. And then the other side of it is the reaction from people on the websites who say, well, you have a big name, so why are you using Kickstarter? You don't need this platform. You should, you know, find other ways of getting this done, which ignores the fact that my studio is a very small independent studio, and that despite whatever name I might have had in the past, that doesn't necessarily translate to easy money for us to make our game ideas today.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of people might underestimate what a production of that size actually costs, but we can't blame them because why would you know? And I think the first type of backers that you mentioned, they will return in the last few days if they see, oh, it's actually not going to happen. So now I will jump on it. And we've seen backers that backed like 120 projects. And to me, it seems like they're in. And once you reach your funding goal, they're out and go back something else that's probably not going to make it. So that's one type that we sort of observed. And then there's other people who just have to see by the end of the project, what do I have left in my Kickstarter budget? It seems they have Kickstarter as this hobby that they really enjoy, and they put some money on the side every month to invest in Kickstarter projects. And then they kind of have to wait and see how much they have left. How did the other project go? Do I have to spend a little bit more there because I'm interested in this stretch goal and all that kind of stuff? It's kind of really something new for us and interesting to see how that whole world of Kickstarter works. So back to your game. so you decided that the concept should be, again, like with Alice, take an existing sort of fairy tale story, create this world and immerse the player in the world, but put your own touch on it.
Yeah, well, we're taking, I think, some of the pretty classic, video game design elements from the action and, adventure type of games. So it's going to be very much like the Alice adaptation, where you've got a third-person camera and you're moving through a world fighting against, fantastic enemies and interacting with NPCs in order to get the story told. We're also looking at things that people reported to us as not something they enjoyed about the Alice game. So, for instance, a lot of players complained about the camera and the lock-on system for combat, and they said that this was either difficult or that it was frustrating. And so we're looking to kind of take some of the lessons learned from those games and to streamline, for instance, the combat system so that it may end up being something where you're in third-person action adventure as you explore, but then when you get into combat, you actually go into a very streamlined turn-based type of combat system.
Okay, so you try to recreate the experience with lessons learned.
Well, we certainly don't want to keep doing the same thing over and over again, right? And
yeah.
that was one of the challenges with the Alice game. And actually, when we were talking about kickstarting a new Alice game, what was really interesting is that when we initially began those conversations with the fans, I proposed that we maybe change the genre of Alice and that we go at it a different way, and that we recognize that a lot of what people like about Alice we could present in a different type of genre. And man, people got so angry. I mean, that was kind of
I would have guessed that.
Yeah, I mean, but this is the thing, is sort of, it's sort of like the video where the fans come and they're so angry at me. There's very little leeway. We don't get a lot of space to kind of move around, set expectations about what they want to see there. But with something like Oz, my hope is that we can take the lessons we've learned about making the Alice games, and we can see where people were frustrated, we can see the things that they really enjoyed, and we can condense all that down into a really solid, really fast-paced, really enjoyable experience.
Okay, so you're trying to make a similar game, but yet different enough to be a new concept, and you can avoid to spoil the experience for the existing fan base, so to speak.
Yeah, well, I think with Oz, that's the thing, is that we don't have to be so worried about spoiling the expectations of the existing fan base. The problem with the existing fan base, the fans of Alice, is not their expectations. It's actually just getting them to agree to participate in this new idea. So like what we saw when we announced that we were going to be working on Ozombie was that on the Alice in Otherlands Facebook page, the fans revolted. They said, I hate this. I don't want anything to do with this new project. I don't want anything to do with this Ozombie thing. I'm going to sit this one out. And that's really frustrating for us because, as a development studio, we need their support. And we'd like to think that we understand the kind of products that they want to play. And so to move over in the IP to the world of Oz and to present the character of Dorothy, to me, that should be something they get very excited about. But instead they go, what, it's not Alice? I don't want anything to do with it. So before we start worrying about sort of violating their expectations about what kind of game it is, we actually have to convince them that they want to come over and play this game in the first place.
Yeah, maybe it's just a few that are really noisy, and it's not the majority. And of course, they're criticizing something that they haven't even seen. So I find
that's the internet for you.
Yeah, I know, but I find it always a bit funny if people, just beat the crap out of a concept that they haven't even completely understood. Because they don't have the facts. They have your.
Well, this is the story of my.
Sorry?
Yeah, this is sort of the story of my life, is that whenever we make an announcement about a new product, it seems there's this very noisy group of people who like to jump onto that and, like you said, beat the crap out of it before we've even had a chance to present the idea or to bring any sort of version of a demo to light. So that's something that's always been a challenge.
Well, to be fair, in your Kickstarter campaign, you're not presenting much of the game except for the concept art and for the general idea. I think you outline it pretty well, but there are factors that are, I wouldn't say boring, but very vague. Like you sort of mentioned that it's also about society subjects, like tolerance against nonconformists, organized religion, individual liberty and self-reliance, the obligation of individuals that they owe their societies and such. Do you want people to think beyond the game and about life and society in general? Is that a really grown-up game in that sense?
Well, I think that the Alice games show that that's something that I enjoy in game making. I don't see games as simply a form of running through an environment and killing bad guys, because I don't think that anybody enjoys that unless there's a proper story there. And I think as soon as we start telling story, we have to ask ourselves, why are we telling that story? What's the ultimate goal or the meaning that we're trying to convey with the story? So with the World of Oz, this is a legacy. The topics you just mentioned of conformity or questioning the source of power, or how power uses manipulation and deceit in order to control a population, these are all concepts that were explored in the original books. And so it's not so much that I'm trying to invent these ideas and bring them to life within the World of Oz. Instead, I'm trying to bring people's attention to the fact that these themes existed in the books, 100 years ago, and that these themes are still relevant to the world in which we live today. You should know quite well, being in Germany and with the news of what the U.S. government's doing in terms of, abuse of its power and spying on the people of the world. This is exactly the kind of question of the game, the type of story we're to tell. How is it that societies and groups of people get themselves into situations where they allow themselves to be manipulated and lied to, so that this select few people can rule over them and do these kinds of things? That's the kind of stuff I want to explore in the game.
Yeah, that's what I found maybe a bit boring to some people, that they have no idea where this is going to go, So is this like a philosophical game? Is that what I want to play? I don't know.
Well, but the Alice games were philosophical games, and yet I managed to write that layer of the thinking and the story in such a way that it wasn't pushed into your face. In fact, a lot of people walked away from the end of the games feeling like there was still a great mystery there. So it's not like I'm trying to, paint the picture and force this view upon you. In fact, a lot of these elements are going to form the backdrop and the subtext of what you're seeing happening in the world. But the point is, we're going to go into a world where things happen for a reason. There's not just a sort of, here's a bunch of people in the desert, they're the bad guys, let's blow them up. This is going to be a world that has a sort of reason for being, and actors in the world that have a reason for doing the things that they're doing.
Right. I think I like that style, obviously. I told you that before. And I don't like games where you blow up things for no reason. So it's totally my type of game. And I hope that we helped a little bit with this interview to highlight what your thoughts are behind it and what your worries are.
Sure.
And maybe we can convince those people who think he's going to make it anyway to open the wallet and help you with your funding. We are running out of time now. We have to go on to the next interview. Thank you for your time. It was a pleasure. And I finally got to see you after working with your stuff for like 12 years.
Well, it was a pleasure. Thank you very much for having me on today.
So thank you. Goodbye.
Okay, bye-bye.